All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 18. We'll be discussing the autonomic nervous system today. The autonomic nervous system, best way I know to describe it is it's that division of the nervous system that takes care of all the functions that lie beneath our conscious control. Without the autonomic nervous system, it'd be extremely difficult for us to navigate the activities of daily living because we would have to consciously control such things as heartbeat, digestion, the movement of blood around the body, vasoconstriction, vasodilation. An act as simple as eating a sandwich would become an extremely complicated affair. Uh, Remember that as we are configured, the voluntary part of digestion ends when we swallow, and after that, peristaltic waves propel the food through our GI. Without an autonomic nervous system, we would have to consciously move that food down the esophagus. We would have to prepare the stomach to secrete gastric juice in advance of the arriving food. We would have to consciously make the stomach churn the food and the gastric secretions inside that chamber. Then we would have to consciously trigger the gallbladder and the pancreas to secrete um, their contributions to the duodenum at the same time that the pylorus releases the acidic chyme. And then we would have to manually propel the chyme through the small and then through the large intestine. Now, just imagine all those processes taking up your day at the same time that you're commanding your heart to beat once a second. You're telling your kidneys to make sure to route blood through the nephrons to be filtered and cleaned, and you're telling now the all the other automatic functions in the body to take place. So the autonomic nervous system evolved so that we could consciously interact with our environment without having to control all those things. Uh, Oddly enough, the autonomic nervous system was probably an earlier version of the nervous system than the somatic system. A lot of organisms on this planet operate basically with autonomic structures, and they don't have a lot of cerebral cortex guiding their activity. I gave you the example of the brain of a crocodile being about the size of a walnut, looking very similar in form and structure to a human brainstem, which is, as we're going to find out, the master of the autonomic nervous system. So, autonomic nervous system functions take care of a lot of the functions that we associate with normal life. The somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system make up the peripheral nervous system. Uh, there are interfaces between these two. The somatic nervous system has nerve cell bodies in the gray matter of the spinal cord and the central nervous system, and then sends out one long axon all the way to its target, that normally being skeletal muscle. The autonomic nervous system is primarily invested with cell bodies in the lateral horns of the gray matter of the spinal cord and sends a two neuron chain out to its target. The autonomic nervous system is not under our conscious control. It's regulated by the hypothalamus and the brainstem. It supplies nerves to the viscera, such as the smooth muscle that line the blood vessels, the stomach, the lymphatics, and also helps to modulate the heart rate. Remember that your heart is going to beat according to our physiological demands on it, so it will speed up or slow down depending on our activity levels, and that is in part controlled by autonomic leads to the heart. And it also innervates glands, such as the sweat glands and the digestive glands. If we compare the two systems to each other, the somatic nervous system controls skeletal muscle. It's under our voluntary control. The motor pathway is a single neuron from the central nervous system all the way to the effector, and it does include sensory neurons that bring information in from the internal and external environment to the central nervous system, and these are located in the skin, the skeletal muscle, and in the special sense organs. All of these release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. The autonomic nervous system controls viscera, smooth and cardiac muscle and glands. It is not under our voluntary control, so it works on the unconscious level. The motor pathway is a series of two neurons that run from the central nervous system to the effector, and it does include sensory neurons that monitor the viscera. Now you might ask, well, what are the viscera? The viscera are your internal organs. It has two divisions, the sympathetic division, which has the nickname the fight or flight division, and the parasympathetic division, which has the nickname the rest and digest division. It releases either acetylcholine or norepinephrine as a neurotransmitter. The acetylcholine is released by the preganglionic neurons of the autonomic nervous system and the postganglionic neurons of the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, while norepinephrine is released by the postganglionic neurons of the sympathetic nervous system. An autonomic motor pathway includes two motor neurons, the preganglionic neuron that runs from the CNS to the neuron in the autonomic ganglia, and the postganglionic neuron that runs from the cell body in the ganglion and goes all the way to the effector. Now you might ask me, well, what's a ganglion? Well, ganglion is basically a cluster of nerve cells. These ganglia in the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system run like a string of pearls down either side of the vertebral column, and they serve as points in which the preganglionic neurons synapse and give rise now to a postganglionic neuron that will move almost all the way to its target. In the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, these ganglia lie much closer to their target, and the postganglionic neuron is extremely short, whereas in the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, these postganglionic neurons are extremely long. So there's a slight difference in structural organization. This chart is showing you some of the differences here. Let's start with this mock-up here of the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Notice that the cell bodies lie in the lateral horn of the gray matter of the spinal cord. Remember that the gray matter are the cell bodies in the spinal cord, while the white matter are the axons. So remember that white matter is meant for signal transmission, while gray matter is meant for signal processing. And so here we have decided to send a signal, process and send a signal out the lateral horn. It goes out the ventral root, as all motor commands do, and then synapses in a paravertebral ganglion in the parasympathetic division. These ganglia lie extremely close to the ultimate target of innervation. Acetylcholine serves as the neurotransmitter in this first synapse, and then the postganglionic neuron extends all the way to the target and uses acetylcholine as its neurotransmitter. And you can see that the effectors are glands, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle all throughout the body. Up top, we're looking here at the setup for the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, and the basic layout is the same, with the exception here being that the preganglionic neurons are extremely short and use acetylcholine as their neurotransmitter, and the postganglionic neurons are rather long and extend all the way to their targets and use norepinephrine as their neurotransmitter, and the effectors are basically the same as in the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Now there's one interesting exception in the sympathetic division, which is the innervation of the adrenal medulla. The second neuron in this case isn't actually a postganglionic neuron at all, but a modified neuron that's designed to release epinephrine directly into the circulatory system. And what this does is it serves to prolong the fight or flight response even after the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system has quit firing. And this is one of the reasons why, when you're in a panic, you don't immediately calm down as soon as the danger has passed. Okay, so an unusual situation in this particular case. The parasympathetic division has no such endocrine assist, and as a result, parasympathetic responses tend to end abruptly. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions basically complement each other. Most viscera are supplied with nerves from both divisions, and this is termed dual innervation, and they generally have opposite effects, although not always. The heart rate in the sympathetic division is stimulated, and the parasympathetic division is slowed down. In the digestive organs, the sympathetic division inhibits digestion and GI motility, while the parasympathetic division stimulates it. Hence the nickname for the sympathetic division as the fight or flight division, and the parasympathetic division as the rest and digest division. Some viscera receive only sympathetic nerves, and these would be the sweat glands, many of the blood vessels, and the hair muscles. This is interesting. For the blood vessels, this provides what we call vasomotor tone, which is one of the physiological responses that helps us maintain our blood pressure. If we did not have this sympathetic innervation of the blood vessels, our blood pressure would drop so low that we would probably pass out and maybe even die. So very important for this sympathetic innervation. And sympathetic preganglionic neurons have cell bodies located in the lateral gray horns of the spinal cord from thoracic 1 through 12 and lumbar 1 through 2. Hence, this division is also called the thoracocolumbar division. Axons pass through the ventral roots of the spinal nerves and may branch many times and may ascend or descend to many levels of the sympathetic trunk ganglia, all the way from the cervical to the sacral region. They can synapse with 20 or more postganglionic neuron cell bodies, and this results in widespread sympathetic effects. Thus, the viscera respond in sympathy with one another, hence the name for this division. This is a very important structural setup to understand, because when you look at the preganglionic neurons, what you find is that they only have direct leads in these regions of the vertebral column, and so it might be a mystery to you how we serve structures in the neck and in the head and below the lumbar region. And the answer to that is that some of these preganglionic neurons, instead of synapsing immediately within these ganglia and sending a postganglionic neuron onto the target, they may actually hit these paravertebral ganglia and immediately turn up or down, so they may ascend or descend within the paravertebral ganglia to areas that lie outside these vertebrae, and as a result we can get sympathetic innervation when they synapse in either a superior or inferior ganglion with a postganglionic neuron that will eventually serve now an organ or a structure that lie outside the areas of the body that are served by T1 through L2. And then some of the nerves actually pass directly through the paravertebral ganglia and head all the way to another intramural ganglia, a ganglia that lies outside this chain of ganglia, and then from there a secondary neuron heads on to the target. These nerves are termed splanchic nerves because they zip straight through the paravertebral ganglia and synapse in a ganglia that's lateral to these, again, these beads on a string that lie on either side of the vertebral column, which we call the paravertebral ganglia. Sympathetic postganglionic neurons have cell bodies that are located in the sympathetic trunk ganglia, which are two long chains lateral to the vertebrae, and they run from the cervical to the sacral regions and have widespread sympathetic effects. Many axons from these cell bodies pass back into the spinal nerves to reach viscera in the skin, such as the sweat glands, the hair, the muscles, and the blood vessels. In sympathetic prevertebral ganglia anterior to three large abdominal arteries, we have now synapses that lie outside these paravertebral ganglia. These are the celiac, superior, and inferior mesenteric ganglia, and these supply the abdominal viscera, the stomach, the intestine, the kidneys, the liver, and the spleen. And this is what I was referring to when I was talking about splanchnic nerves that pass right through these paravertebral ganglia and then head on to their target. These are some of those ganglia that lie outside the paravertebral ganglia. So very interesting anatomical setup. Now, something I want you to remember about the way that this is organized is that this is by necessity going to be slower than the somatic motor system, and for one very simple reason. There are more synapses. Remember that I told you the more synapses there are in a nervous pathway, the slower it is. The reason for this is that the synapse is the choke point for nervous transmission because it relies on diffusion of neurotransmitters across a small gap. And in neuron time, that's a much, much longer process than the electrical conduction across the membrane of a nerve cell. Okay. In addition to that, if you look at the degree of myelination in these autonomic neurons, it's less than you see in the somatic motor system. So these axons that we're talking about earlier pass from ganglia to viscera in splanchnic nerves. And this is just showing you the setup for the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. These are the chain ganglia, okay? And what they're showing you here is the preganglionic neurons, which will either synapse and ascend in the case of these cervical and cephalic nerves that serve structures in the face and in the neck, in the heart here, or they synapse at the level from which they emerge, and then postganglionic neuron heads on to the target, or they synapse and descend below the lumbar region and then serve organs and structures that lie in the sacral region and even below that. Okay, so you can see some of the structures served here. These are some of the ganglia that lie outside the paravertebral ganglia that sympathetic preganglionic neurons can also synapse with. Okay, so these are splanchnic nerves indicated here. If you want to get a clearer look at this, refer to this particular figure in your book, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But anyway, these are ganglia that lie outside these paravertebral chains, and the postganglionic neuron then goes on to serve ultimately its target. Bottom line is that the preganglionic neurons are rather short, while the postganglionic neurons are quite long. Acetylcholine is used in the synapse between the pre and the postganglionic neurons, while norepinephrine is generally used by the postganglionic neurons on their targets. Okay, if we look a little bit closer, what we can see is the setup whereby these sympathetic preganglionic neurons enter and leave the paravertebral ganglia. And basically there are two ramps called the rami communicans that serve as on and off ramps for these spinal nerves. So what you're looking at here is basically the emergence of a preganglionic neuron through the ventral root. It then actually zips right by these paravertebral ganglia, and then it merges on to this chain of ganglia using the rami communicans as an on-ramp. And then once the synapsing has occurred, the postganglionic neuron will then leave via the rami communicans and head on ultimately to the target. Okay, so it's like an on-ramp and then an off-ramp, and then we head on down ultimately to innervate whatever our target happens to be, depending on, again, which ventral nerve root we're referring to. Okay, so that's all we mean by the rami communicans. They come in two colors, the white and the gray rami communicans. The gray rami communicans is considered to be the on-ramp, and the white is considered to be the off-ramp. But I don't think we need to get into that much detail about these. Okay, parasympathetic preganglionic neurons have cell bodies that are located in the brainstem and the spinal cord from segments sacral 2 through 4. Therefore, the parasympathetic division is called the craniosacral. Okay, so its leads come primarily from either the head and the neck or in the sacral region, and then they synapse in intramural ganglia that lie very, very close to the target that's eventually going to be innervated. Axons in cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10, and in pelvic nerves S2 through S4 are part of this division. The vagus nerves carry 80% of all the parasympathetic nerve impulses. The vagus nerve is a very unusual cranial nerve in that it completely leaves the area of the head and it serves many of the body's internal organs. It carries both motor and sensory neurons to and from the viscera within the thorax and most of the abdominal cavity. So the vagus nerve is one of the longer nerves in the body. Parasympathetic preganglionic axons do not branch or pass through sympathetic trunk ganglia, but pass directly almost all the way to their target. The postganglionic neurons of this division have cell bodies that lie in terminal ganglia that are located within or near the innervated region. So parasympathetic nerves cause very precise, localized effects. Because of their anatomical arrangement, sympathetic nerves supply all viscera, but parasympathetic nerves do not reach certain viscera. These viscera include the sweat glands, the erector pili muscles of the hair and the skin, the kidneys, the spleen, the adrenal medulla, and the walls of most of the blood vessels. Those are served exclusively by the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. The axons from these ganglia to the viscera in parasympathetic nerves pass right by the paravertebral ganglia and head again almost all the way to their target. And so here is just a diagram of the setup here. Notice that the ganglia that the preganglionic neuron synapse with lie very, very close to their target. Okay, you can see some of the ganglia here. Okay, the otic ganglia, submandibular, pteropalatine, and so forth. Down here, again, you've got ganglia that lie almost entirely within the target. Okay, when we're talking about here the sacral region of the craniosacral division. And again, just keep in mind the nickname of this division, the rest and digest division. In both synapses, we're talking about here using acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter. There is no norepinephrine involved, and generally the actions here are to do things like increase GI motility, decrease blood pressure, to reduce blood sugar. Okay, all these things are part of, again, the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so if we look at, again, a comparison of the two divisions, acetylcholine is more commonly released by all sympathetic and parasympathetic preganglionic axons and all parasympathetic postganglionic axons, and some sympathetic postganglionic axons, such as those that serve the sweat glands. Acetylcholine is destroyed by the enzyme acetylcholinesterase in order to, again, recycle the components of this neurotransmitter in preparation for the next nerve transmission. So this is a very short-lived response. Norepinephrine, on the other hand, is less common. It's released by almost all sympathetic postganglionic axons. It has longer-lasting effects, which are enhanced by the epinephrine and norepinephrine that flood the bloodstream from the adrenal medulla when you have the fight-or-flight response. Okay, so fundamental difference in these neurotransmitters. Okay, so what are the effects? Well, sympathetic effects serve to prepare us for an emergency situation. This is the fight-or-flight response. It serves to increase the heart rate and contraction and the blood pressure, increase the respiratory rate, dilate the pupils and the airways, to increase peripheral vasodilation so that we serve the skeletal muscle, the heart, liver, and adipose tissue, and we constrict blood vessels to non-essential organs which lie primarily in the core, such as the skin, the GI, and the kidneys. And we also trigger now gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis in an effort to raise blood sugar so that we can provide fuel so that we can perform whatever activity is at hand. Parasympathetic effects are the opposite. The acronym SLUD can be used. This stands for salivation, lacrimation, urination, digestion, and defecation. And what are each of these? Well, salivation, you know, right? That's to increase the production of oral secretions via the salivary glands in preparation for the digestion of food. Lacrimation is the production of tears. Urination and digestion, you know, and defecation is to basically cause solid waste to be evacuated from the body. It also serves to decrease the heart rate, the airway diameter, and the pupillary diameter. Okay, so again, parasympathetic effects generally are antagonistic to sympathetic effects. Okay, that brings us to the end of this chapter. Be sure to watch this lecture on YouTube as a video podcast. If you have any questions, make sure to shoot me an email or to ask in class, and I'll be happy to go over anything that's unclear for you. Thanks a bunch.